The northern wind howled against the heavy stone walls of the Black Keep. Inside the great hall, the air was thick with the scent of roasted meat, spilled ale, and the sharp, mocking laughter of apex predators. The warriors of the Obsidian Crag pack were drinking heavily. Their golden eyes flashed in the firelight as they shared brutal tales of the border patrols. In the center of the massive room, sitting perfectly still beside a roaring hearth, was Elara. She looked exactly like what they called her, a fragile porcelain doll. A useless human bride traded to buy 50 years of peace. She wore a heavy, oversized velvet cloak that swallowed her slender frame. Her porcelain skin caught the flickering light of the flames. Her sharp collarbones looked as though they might snap under the weight of her own clothing. Her shoulders trembled. To the wolves of the Obsidian Crag, her trembling was the pathetic display of human fear. They sneered at her. They tossed gnawed bones into the fire near her boots. They wanted her to flinch. They did not know her trembling was restraint. Elara kept her icy blue eyes downcast, her face completely devoid of emotion. Beneath the heavy folds of her velvet sleeves, her thumb slowly traced the smooth edge of a blackened steel ring. A massive warrior with a scarred jaw laughed loudly, slamming his iron cup onto a wooden table. He stood exactly 10 feet away from her. Elara calculated the distance in her mind. 3 strides. A severed Achilles tendon, a crushed windpipe. It would take her exactly 2 seconds to stop his breathing completely. But she remained seated. Her hands did not reach for a weapon. Her breathing stayed steady and measured. Her father had forged her in 15 years of hellish training in the dark fighting pits of the East. He had broken her down and rebuilt her into an executioner. She was a weapon of precision, not a tavern brawler. She would wait. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of the great hall groaned open. The laughter in the room died instantly. The temperature seemed to drop. Kalen, the Alpha King of the Obsidian Crag, stepped into the light. He was a mountain of a man. Broad-shouldered and imposing, he radiated a heavy, chilling command. His dark leather armor was stained with fresh blood from the woods. His piercing amber eyes swept over the silent hall. He did not yell. He did not bare his fangs. His mere presence was a physical weight pressing against the chests of every wolf in the room. Kalen's jaw locked. His inner wolf was usually restless and violent after a bloody border skirmish. But as he stepped deeper into the hall, the beast inside him suddenly quieted. He caught a scent. It was not the sweet, floral perfume of a typical human noble. It was the scent of frost. Pure, biting, absolute silence. It smelled like the deep winter woods when all the prey had gone hiding. The scent came from the trembling girl by the fire. Kalen walked slowly toward her. The pack held its collective breath. His heavy boots echoed against the stone floor. He stood before his new wife, his shadow swallowing her completely. He looked down at her fragile shoulders, noting how terribly small she seemed. Without a word, Kalen unclasped his heavy black fur mantle. He leaned down and draped it carefully over her trembling shoulders. The heavy weight of his protection settled around her, carrying the scent of pine and rain. He turned his back to her, facing his pack. "Leave her," Kalen commanded. His voice was a low rumble, dark and final. It echoed off the high vaulted ceilings. "The next man who bares his teeth at my Luna will lose them." The warriors of the Obsidian Crag lowered their heads in absolute submission. No one dared to meet their king's eyes. Behind him, Elara pulled the thick fur tighter around her neck. She looked up, her icy blue eyes meeting his amber gaze for the very first time. Kaelin saw the pale skin and the quiet stare. He thought he was looking at a terrified girl who needed his protection. He did not know he was staring directly into the eyes of the deadliest hunter in the entire kingdom. The royal bedchamber of the Black Keep was vast and shadowed, built from the same dark stone as the rest of the fortress. A massive hearth dominated the far wall, where a roaring fire fought back the bitter northern cold. Elara sat at the edge of the heavy oak bed. She was still wrapped in Kaelin's black fur mantle. The scent of pine and rain surrounded her, heavy and grounding. To the rest of the kingdom, she was a prisoner of a political trade. Lord Harrington, her father, had surrendered his youngest illegitimate daughter to buy a fragile peace for his southern farmlands. The court had expected the savage alpha of the Obsidian Crag to tear her apart within the week. But the door opened quietly. Kaelin stepped into the room. He had washed the blood from his armor and changed into a simple dark tunic and heavy trousers. In his large, scarred hands, he carried an iron tray. He moved with an unnatural grace for a man of his immense size. His amber eyes remained soft, carefully keeping his alpha aura pulled back so it would not crush the delicate air of the room. He set the tray down on a small wooden table near the fire. "The northern winters are unforgiving," Kaelin said, his deep voice keeping to a gentle, low volume. "You must eat." Elara looked at it, the tray. It was a roasted pheasant, perfectly cooked, alongside warm bread and a cup of spiced wine. There was no trace of the raw, bloody cuts of meat that the lichens of the crag tore into during their feasts. He had specifically ordered the kitchen to prepare human food for her, ensuring not a single drop of blood would frighten his new bride. She stood up slowly, playing her part perfectly. She kept her gaze low, her hands folded in front of her, as if unsure of what to do. "Thank you, my lord," she whispered. Her voice was soft, trembling just enough to sound thoroughly intimidated. Kaelin nodded. He stepped back, putting the heavy wooden table between them to give her space. He sank into a large leather chair by the fire, letting out a long, slow exhale. His massive frame relaxed as he watched the flames. Under the cover of the heavy fur mantle, Elara's thumb rubbed the cold surface of her blackened steel ring. Her icy blue eyes darted up beneath her dark lashes, tracing the lines of his body. She was not admiring her husband. She was taking his measure. She noted the thick cords of muscle in his neck, precisely calculating the depth required to reach his carotid artery. She studied the way he sat, observing that his left shoulder hung slightly lower than his right, an old war injury, perhaps a microscopic delay in his guard. She listened to the slow, steady rhythm of his heartbeat. He was the apex predator of the North, a beast forged in war. And yet, his wolf was entirely silent. For Kaelin, the mate bond was an unexplainable puzzle. His beast usually roared with territorial aggression against strangers, demanding absolute submission. But near this frail human, his wolf curled up and rested. Her scent, that crisp, biting smell of frost, acted like an anchor in the chaotic storm of his mind. Elara sat carefully at the table and took a small sip of the spiced wine. "He is careful with you," a dark, cynical voice whispered in her mind. Just like the handlers before a pit fight. Before her father had dressed her in silk and velvet, Elara had spent 15 years in the shadowed fighting rings of the East. She had not been raised in a castle. She had been hidden away in a remote abbey, handed over to a banished gladiator named Thorne, not the Alpha, but a broken man who taught her the brutal geometry of survival. He had handed her a training sword before she could properly read. He had beaten the tears out of her before she was 10. He taught her that a woman's safety in a world of monsters came not from a pretty face, but from calloused hands, perfect timing, and a completely frozen heart. Beneath her soft gloves, Elara's knuckles were scarred. Her forearms, hidden beneath the heavy velvet sleeves, were tightly wound with lean, hardened muscle. She had been sent to the Black Keep for one reason. Her father knew the rival Bloodwood pack planned to break the border soon. He had made a secret deal with them. Elara was not a peace offering. She was an assassin, planted in the Alpha King's bed to slit his throat while he slept. You do not need to hide your fear, Elara. Kaelin's voice pulled her from her dark thoughts. He was looking at her, his amber eyes reflecting the firelight. There was a profound sadness in his gaze. I know what the Southern Lords say of me. They call me a monster. They say I bathe in the blood of those who displease me. Kaelin leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. But you are my Luna. You are under my roof. As long as I draw breath, no one in this kingdom will raise a hand against you. You will not bleed in my house. Elara froze. Her hand stopped halfway to her mouth. The spiced wine trembled slightly in her cup. For 15 years, she had been a tool. Her father used her. Her master sharpened her. Men had looked at her as a weapon, a bastard, or a disposable pawn. But this massive, battle-scarred wolf, the creature she was sent here to murder, was looking at her with nothing but absolute, protective devotion. He demanded nothing from her. He only offered an impenetrable shield. Slowly, Elara lowered the cup. The grip on her blackened steel ring loosened by a fraction of a millimeter. She looked away, staring into the fire. The flames danced in her icy blue eyes. A strange, unfamiliar ache tightened her chest. The monsters she had fought in the pits were easy to kill. They ran on rage and predictable violence. But Kaelin's gentleness was something entirely different. It was terrifying. Because for the first time in her life, the flawless, cold logic of the Obsidian executioner began to crack. The storm broke over the Obsidian Crag 2 days later, bringing a violent blizzard that buried the outer walls in white. But the cold outside was nothing compared to the tension that suddenly gripped the Black Keep. The heavy iron doors of the royal bedchamber swung open with a harsh crash. Kaelin walked in, heavily supported by his second-in-command. The Alpha King's face was pale, his jaw tightly clenched. Deep, jagged claw marks tore through his dark leather armor, weeping thick, dark blood onto the stone floor. He had been ambushed on the southern ridge by a scouting party from the rival Bloodwood pack. Healers rushed into the room, carrying bandages and herbal salves. The metallic tang of blood filled the air. Keep your voices down, Kaelin growled through clenched teeth, his amber eyes scanning the room until they found Elara. She was standing by the hearth, her hands pressed over her mouth in a perfect pantomime of human terror. Do not frighten my Luna. Even bleeding and in pain, his first instinct was to shield her from the brutal reality of his world. The healers worked quickly, stitching the deep wounds and applying poultices to accelerate his lichen healing. Once the worst of the bleeding was stopped, Kaelin ordered everyone out. He needed the restorative sleep of this wolf. Within minutes, the room was empty, save for the sleeping Alpha and his quiet bride. Kaelin's discarded armor lay in a heap near the heavy wooden table. Elara dropped the frightened act. Her face smoothed into a mask of cold, calculating stillness. She moved silently across the room, her footsteps making absolutely no sound on the stone floor. She knelt beside Kaylin's ruined leather vest. Her sharp eyes had caught something earlier, a crumpled piece of parchment tucked inside a pouch that Kaylin had stripped from a dead Bloodwood assassin. The Lycans could not read the complex ciphers of human nobles, but Elara could. She carefully pulled the parchment free and carried it to the firelight. It bore a broken wax seal. The insignia was heavily smudged, but she recognized the subtle curve of the Harrington crest, her father's seal. Elara read the coded lines. The cipher was one she had been forced to memorize in the fighting pits. As her eyes scanned the elegant, ruthless handwriting, the temperature in the room seemed to plummet. "The crag will be blind by the new moon," the letter read. "Once the human pawn cuts the Alpha's throat, burn the keep, leave no survivors, especially not the girl." Elara stared at the parchment. The flames of the hearth danced in her icy blue eyes. She was not just a peace offering. She was not even a valued assassin. She was a disposable blade. Her father had orchestrated the perfect betrayal. She was meant to murder Kaylin, plunging the Obsidian Crag into chaos, allowing Alpha Thorne of the Bloodwood Pack to slaughter everyone. And then Thorne's men were ordered to kill her, erasing the only evidence of her father's treason. She had been sent here to die. Elara slowly crumpled the parchment and tossed it into the fire. She watched it burn until it was nothing but gray ash. Midnight draped the room in heavy shadows. The only sound was the crackle of the dying fire and Kaylin's deep, rhythmic breathing. The herbal salves had dragged him into a deep, restorative sleep. Elara walked slowly to the edge of the massive oak bed. She looked down at the Alpha King. His broad chest rose and fell steadily. He looked entirely vulnerable. The Lycan instinct should have woken him the moment a predator stepped within striking distance. His wolf should have been howling a warning, but her scent of frost blanketed the room. To Kaylin's beast, she was not a threat. She was the ultimate safety. His wolf trusted her completely, leaving the king's throat completely exposed. With a flick of her wrist, a slender, razor-sharp stiletto slid from a hidden sheath inside her velvet sleeve. The blackened steel caught the faint glow of the embers. Elara held the dagger over Kaylin's chest. She measured the exact space between his collarbone and his jaw. One quick, precise thrust, and the monster of the north would be dead. Her father's orders would be fulfilled. She stood there in the absolute silence, the heavy blade steady in her calloused hand. "You will not bleed in my house." Kaylin's deep, rumbling voice echoed in her mind. She looked at the heavy black fur mantle resting on the chair, the cloak he had placed over her shoulders when the entire pack laughed at her. She thought of the warm, cooked food he brought her with his own scarred hands, demanding nothing in return. He was a terrifying beast to his enemies, but to her, he had offered only the shield of his authority. Elara lowered the dagger. A sharp, unfamiliar warmth broke through the ice in her chest. She had spent 15 years surviving by having a cold heart, but her father had made a fatal miscalculation. He had treated her like a mindless tool, but Kaylin had treated her like a queen. With a smooth motion, the stiletto vanished back into her sleeve. Her thumb brushed against the blackened steel ring on her hand. Elara turned her back to the bed and looked out the frosted window toward the southern mountains. The Bloodwood Pack was coming. Her father's betrayal was already in motion. But they did not know that the weapon they had planted in the Black Keep was no longer theirs to command. Lord Harrington had sent a pawn to die. Instead, he had given the Alpha King of the Obsidian Crag an executioner. The brutal winter storm raged for nearly a week, burying the Black Keep under thick sheets of ice. But the true danger arrived the morning the skies finally cleared. The heavy iron gates of the fortress shrieked open to admit a delegation from the south. Alpha Thorne of the Bloodwood Pack had arrived. He did not come as a conquered foe, nor as a friendly neighbor. He rode under the white banner of the Winter Truce, an ancient Lycan law that guaranteed safe passage for peace negotiations. To attack him while he carried the banner would unite all the northern packs against the Obsidian Crag. Thorne knew this perfectly well. He had brought 30 of his largest, most savage warriors with him, marching into Kaelin's great hall with arrogant, heavy steps. Thorne was a massive, grotesque brute of a Lycan. His face was a map of jagged, ugly scars, and his eyes were small, dark, and cruel. He smelled of old blood and raw ambition. Kaelin sat at the head of the long wooden table. He wore his heavy black fur mantle, his posture rigid and commanding. Though his deep wounds from the ambush were still healing, his alpha aura pressed down on the room with terrifying weight. To Kaelin's immediate right sat Elara. She wore a high-collared dress of dark gray wool, her signature velvet cloak wrapped tightly around her small shoulders. She kept her gaze politely lowered, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The picture of perfect, helpless nobility. Thorne tore a massive chunk of roasted meat from a bone with his teeth, chewing loudly as he paced the length of the hall. His dark, glittering eyes locked onto Elara. "Tell me, Kaelin," Thorne said, his rough voice echoing off the stone walls. "Are the winters so harsh in the crag that you must take human leftovers to warm your bed? She smells like fear and stale milk." The hall fell into a dead silence. The Obsidian Crag warriors bristled, their hands dropping to the hilts of their swords. Kaelin's jaw tightened. A low, dangerous rumble vibrated in his chest. "Watch your tongue, Thorne. You stand in my hall. My Luna is not a subject for your amusement." Thorne threw his head back and let out a grating, barking laugh. "Luna?" Thorne spat the word like poison. "A true Luna is the mother of warriors. She is the strength of the pack. This fragile little twig would snap if the wind blew too hard." Thorne took a sudden, heavy step toward Elara. It was a deliberate invasion of space, a test of dominance meant to force the human girl to cower and cry out. But Elara did not flinch. Beneath the table, her thumbs lit over the cold surface of her blackened steel ring. Her icy blue eyes flicked upward for a fraction of a second. She watched Thorne's heavy, lumbering steps. He relies entirely on brute force. Her mind analyzed with clinical detachment. His right knee is stiff. He carries too much weight in his upper body. A lateral strike to the femoral artery would drop him in 3 seconds. Before Thorne could take another step, Kaelin was on his feet. The heavy wooden chair crashed backward. In a blur of motion, Kaelin stood firmly between Thorne and Elara. The sheer force of Kaelin's alpha aura slammed into the Bloodwood warriors like a physical wall, forcing several of the younger wolves to take a step back and bare their throats in instinctual submission. Kaelin's eyes had shifted from their usual amber to a glowing, terrifying gold. Sharp, dark claws tore through the tips of his leather gloves. "Take one more step toward her," Kaelin whispered. The softness of his voice was far more terrifying than a roar. "Truce banner or not, I will tear your head from your shoulders." Thorne stopped. For a moment, genuine hesitation flickered in the brute's dark eyes. Even wounded, the Obsidian King was a force of catastrophic violence. But then, a slow, malicious grin spread across Thorne's scarred face. This was exactly what the Bloodwood Alpha had wanted. Lord Harrington's secret letter had promised that the human girl would be a vulnerability. Thorne saw now that Kaelin was hopelessly tethered to her. Thorne raised his thick hands in a mocking gesture of surrender. I am not here to shed blood in your dining hall, Caitlin, Thorne said smoothly, his voice dripping with venom. I am a traditionalist. I respect the old ways. The laws our ancestors carved into the stones of this very mountain. A murmur of unease rippled through the elders of the Obsidian Crag. Caitlin's golden eyes narrowed. And the old law is clear, Thorne declared, his voice rising so every wolf in the hall could hear. If a visiting alpha believes the host pack is weakened by a fragile, unworthy mate, a mate who puts the entire bloodline at risk, he has the right to challenge. The blood drained from the faces of the Obsidian Crag elders. Caitlin froze, his chest heaving as the realization hit him. Thorne pointed a thick, clawed finger directly at Elara, his smile widening into a grotesque display of yellow fangs. I invoke the right of the Luna. A collective gasp swept through the elders of the Obsidian Crag. Caitlin's blood ran completely cold. The right of the Luna was an ancient, barbaric law written in the blood of the first Lycan packs centuries ago. If a visiting alpha formally challenged the strength of the host's Luna, claiming her weakness endangered the northern territories, he could demand a trial by combat. The trap was flawlessly cruel. If Elara fought Thorne, she would be slaughtered in seconds. If Caitlin stepped into the ring to fight for her, the ancient law dictated that he was automatically forfeiting his crown, admitting he had chosen a mate too weak to stand beside a king. Either way, Alpha Thorne would take control of the Obsidian Crag without a full-scale war. You are a coward, Thorne, Caitlin roared, his voice shaking the heavy iron chandeliers above. You hide behind dust and old bones to steal my land. It is the law of our fathers, Thorne shouted back, gesturing to the pale, trembling elders of the crag. This human stains our history. I challenge the Luna of the Obsidian Crag to a duel of honor. If she lives, my pack leaves and recognizes your borders forever. If she dies, or if you fight for her, you surrender your crown. Caitlin's claws dug deep into the thick wood of the table, splintering it. His golden eyes blazed with a terrifying, absolute fury.
I will not fail them.
He did not care about the law. He did not care about the crown.
Ever.
He prepared to lunge over the table and tear Thorne's throat out. Consequences be damned. But as his muscles coiled for the strike, he looked down at Elara. She was sitting so incredibly still. Her pale hands were folded in her lap. To Caitlin, she looked like a trapped bird, paralyzed by the sheer terror of the monster surrounding her. If Caitlin killed Thorne now, he would break the winter truce. The entire North would unite against the Obsidian Crag. His pack would be slaughtered, and Elara would be hunted down and torn apart by the survivors. The heavy, suffocating weight of leadership crushed down on his shoulders. But Caitlin was a king who protected his own. Slowly, the golden fire in his eyes faded back to a deep, sorrowful amber. His sharp claws retracted. He turned away from the gloating alpha of the Bloodwood pack and knelt on one knee beside Elara's chair. The entire great hall fell into a stunned silence. The Alpha King of the Obsidian Crag, the most feared warrior in the northern mountains, was kneeling before a fragile human girl. Caitlin reached out and placed a large, warm hand gently over her cold, trembling fingers. Do not speak, Elara, he whispered. His deep voice was thick with emotion, meant only for her ears. I will not let him touch you. I will step down. We will leave tonight. I will take you south, to the coast, far away from these mountains. I do not care about the crown if it means your death.
Loyalty
Elara stopped
is
breathing.
to you.
Her thumb froze against the blackened steel ring. She stared down into Kaelin's amber eyes. He was serious. He was entirely, unhesitatingly serious. For 15 years, Elara had been taught that power was the only
Yes.
truth in the world.
Thank you.
Her father had sacrificed her to gain power. Her gladiator master had beaten her to teach her power. Alpha Thorne was manipulating ancient laws to steal power. But Kaelin was
Yes.
throwing it all away.
Thank you.
He was discarding a kingdom, an army, and his entire legacy just to keep
I
a
will
political
step
hostage
away.
breathing. A profound, violent
I will
shift
give
occurred
up
inside Elara's mind.
everything for
The
your
cold, flawless
safety.
geometry of her assassin's training realigned. Lord Harrington's orders burned to ash in her memory.
I
She was
will
no longer
step
her father's
away.
pawn. Kaelin had shielded her.
I will give
Now,
up
the executioner would
everything
shield
for
him.
your safety.
Elara slowly pulled her hand out from under Kaelin's large palm. The trembling stopped entirely. Kaelin looked up, confusion crossing his scarred face as he felt the sudden change in her posture. The scent of frost in the air did not smell like fear anymore.
This for me?
It smelled like a drawn blade. Elara stood up. She did not keep her head bowed. She did not slump her shoulders. Her spine straightened, transforming her posture into one of absolute, chilling authority.
This for me?
The heavy velvet cloak slipped slightly, revealing the tight, unyielding tension in her jaw. She turned her icy blue eyes toward Alpha Thorne. The look in her gaze was so utterly dead, so devoid of any human warmth, that the massive brute actually blinked in surprise. "I accept your challenge, Alpha Thorne," Elara said. Her voice was no longer a soft, frightened whisper. It rang out through the silent hall, clear, cold, and hard as tempered steel. Kaelin froze, staring at her in horror. "Elara, no!" She did not look at her husband. She kept her eyes locked on Thorne, measuring the exact thickness of his neck. "Tomorrow at noon in the frost yard," Elara continued calmly. "But I add one condition to your ancient law, Thorne." Thorne sneered, recovering his bravado, though a strange unease prickled at the back of his neck. "Speak it, little bird." Elara stepped around the wooden table, her movements terrifyingly smooth. "When I win," she said, her voice dropping to a deadly, quiet cadence that carried perfectly to every lichen ear in the room. "Your pack does not swear loyalty to my husband. When you die, the Bloodwood pack belongs to me." The midday sun was painfully bright, reflecting off the hardened ice of the frost yard. The ancient combat circle was carved into the bedrock of the mountain, surrounded by towering black stone walls. Hundreds of lichens lined the perimeter. The warriors of the Obsidian Crag stood in tense, grim silence, while the soldiers of the Bloodwood pack nudged each other, sharing dark, eager grins. Their breath plumed in the freezing air, creating a thick mist over the arena. They had gathered to watch an execution. At the edge of the circle, Kaelin paced like a caged beast. His heavy boots crushed the frost beneath him. He had spent the entire night and the early hours of the morning begging Elara to flee.
I don't understand.
He had offered her his fastest horse, a chest of
What
gold,
is
and a heavy
this
escort to the
feeling?
southern ports. She had refused every plea with the exact same unnerving, tranquil silence. Now, as she stood near the iron gates of the yard, Kaelin
I
stopped
don't
in front of her.
understand.
His chest heaved.
What
His golden
is
eyes were
this
wide,
feeling?
filled with a mixture of raw terror and protective fury. "Elara," Kaelin pleaded, his deep voice cracking. "It is not too late. Step out of the ring. Let them take the crown. I will not watch you die from my throne." Elara looked up at the massive Alpha King. The harsh sunlight illuminated the pale, delicate features of her face, but the absolute stillness in her icy blue eyes was startling. Slowly, she reached out. Her calloused fingers gently touched the thick leather of his armor, resting right above his heart. "You offered your kingdom to save my life, Kaelin," Elara said softly, the words meant only for him. "No one has ever placed value on my life before. Not my father, not my masters. Only you." Kaelin stared down at her, the mate bond inside him pulling violently at his ribs. The scent of frost radiating from her was no longer comforting. It was sharp, biting, preparing for winter. "I am not fighting for your throne," Elara told him, her voice steady. "I am fighting because you proved you are worthy of keeping it." She dropped her hand and turned away, stepping across the boundary line into the center of the frost yard. Alpha Thorne was already waiting. He had stripped off his heavy furs, standing bare-chested in the freezing wind to display a massive torso thick with muscle and jagged battle scars. He did not fully shift into his wolf form. Doing so against a frail human woman would look cowardly. Instead, he let the beast rise just beneath his skin. His muscles swelled, thick black veins crawled up his neck, and his fingernails elongated into thick, razor-sharp claws. His jaw pushed forward, revealing rows of yellowed fangs. "I will make this slow, little bird," Thorne sneered. He cracked his thick neck, the sound echoing sharply in the cold air. "I will break your legs first, so Kaelin can listen to you scream before I take his crown." Elara did not answer. She stopped exactly in the center of the icy circle. With slow, deliberate movements, she reached up and unclasped the heavy velvet cloak at her neck. The thick fabric slipped from her shoulders and fell to the snow with a soft thud. A ripple of confusion swept through the watching lichens. Beneath the oversized cloak, Elara was not wearing the restricting silk dresses or tight corsets of a human noble. She wore tightly fitted, boiled black leather. The armor was minimalist, designed purely for mobility, reinforced with dark steel rivets at the joints. Without the bulky velvet hiding her frame, the lichens could see the tight, hardened, lean muscle of her arms and straight holders. Her posture was completely transformed. Her feet were planted shoulder-width apart, her weight perfectly balanced on the balls of her feet. She did not look like a frightened bride. She stood like a veteran soldier. Elara did not look at Thorne. She turned her head slightly toward the edge of the ring, where two guards stood beside the long, canvas-wrapped wooden chest she had brought from the south. Her dowry. "Open it," Elara commanded. Her voice was sharp and clear. The guards hesitated, glancing at Kaelin. The Alpha King gave a curt, tight nod. They kicked the lid open and pulled back the heavy canvas. Elara walked over to the chest. She reached down with both hands and gripped the dark handle inside. When she pulled her weapon free, the mocking whispers of the Bloodwood warriors died instantly. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the frost yard. It was not a delicate fencing rapier. It was not a hidden assassin's dagger. It was a massive, two-handed greatsword forged from pure, folded dark steel. The weapon was nearly as tall as Elara herself. The hilt was wrapped in rough wire for a secure grip, and the crossguard was thick and utilitarian. It was a weapon of pure, unadulterated devastation, designed to cleave through armor and bone. The sheer weight of the blade should have been impossible for a woman of her size to lift, let alone wield. But Elara carried it effortlessly. She stepped back into the center of the ring, resting the flat of the heavy blade in front of her. Her thumb slid away from the blackened steel ring on her hand and wrapped tightly around the sword's hilt. Thorne's arrogant smile faltered for a fraction of a second. His dark eyes widened, as he stared at the terrifying piece of black iron in the human woman's hands. Elara's breathing slowed to a perfectly measured rhythm. The world around her narrowed down to shapes, angles, and distances. "Begin," she whispered. The elder on the high balcony raised his hand and dropped a white cloth. The trial began. Alpha Thorne did not waste a single second. He erupted forward with terrifying speed, a massive blur of heavily scarred muscle and deadly claws. He let out a deafening war cry that vibrated in the chests of everyone present, aiming a wide, brutal backhand swing straight at Elara's head. It was a blow designed to decapitate her through sheer, blunt force. Elara did not attempt to block it. Trying to parry the raw strength of an enraged lichen with stiff arms would have shattered her bones instantly. Instead, she executed a flawless lateral pivot. She dropped her center of gravity, spinning smoothly on her back foot. Thorne's deadly claws cut through empty air mere inches above her dark hair. The immense forward momentum of his missed strike threw his heavy body slightly off balance. His left flank was exposed for a fraction of a second. With a sharp exhale, Elara twisted her hips, bringing the massive dark steel greatsword around in a tight, punishing arc. She did not use pure arm strength. She used the torque of her entire body and the heavy weight of the blade. The black steel sliced cleanly into the thick muscle of Thorne's side, sliding exactly between his floating ribs. Thorne roared in genuine pain and shock. He spun wildly, backhanding the air to crush her before she could retract the blade. But Elara was already gone. She slid backward across the frost, her boots leaving smooth, parallel lines in the ice. A collective gasp of disbelief rose from the Bloodwood warriors. Their invincible alpha was bleeding. A tiny, fragile human woman had drawn first blood in a matter of seconds. At the edge of the ring, Kaelin's hands gripped the iron fence so tightly the metal began to bend. His golden eyes were wide, tracking her every movement. The scent of frost filling the air was not the smell of a frightened prey hiding in the snow. It was the scent of a cold, calculated predator lying in wait. Thorne clutched his bleeding side. His dark eyes went completely black with feral, unhinged rage. "I will tear you into pieces," Thorne bellowed, giving full control over to his inner beast. His bones cracked and elongated. Thick, coarse fur erupted across his skin. Within seconds, a towering, 9-foot-tall lichen monster stood in the center of the bloody snow, his massive jaws dripping with saliva. He lunged again, abandoning all tactical thought. He swung wildly, a storm of devastating claw strikes meant to crush her into the ice. Elara became an untouchable phantom. She remembered her disgraced master's harsh voice echoing in the fighting pits. Wolves fight with blind anger. They rely on fear and intimidation. You will fight with geometry. You will use science. Let their own weight be the anvil you break them upon. She moved through the storm of claws with clinical precision. She deflected strikes with the flat of her heavy blade, guiding his massive fists to smash into the frozen ground rather than meeting his strength head-on. She measured his breathing. She watched his footwork. She knew the anatomical flaws of a lichen body perfectly from years of study. When a lichen gave in to pure rage, their heart rate skyrocketed. Their muscles tightened without conscious thought, and they always, inevitably, overextended their strikes. It happened on Thorne's fourth feral lunge. Thorne brought both massive, clawed hands down in a crushing overhead strike, putting his entire 9-foot frame into the blow to smash her against the bedrock. Elara sidestepped with mathematical perfection. As Thorne's fists slammed into the frozen earth, shattering the ice and sending shards flying into the air, his thick neck and shoulders were left completely overextended, and even Thist exposed. This was the exact, calculated moment. Elara stepped deep into his broken guard. She planted her leading boot firmly into the solid earth. She drew every ounce of kinetic energy from the ground, up through her legs, her torso, and her twisting core. She swung the massive black steel greatsword in a devastating horizontal circle. The ancient steel sang a high, chilling note as it cut through the freezing air. The heavy blade met the side of Thorne's thick neck with the unstoppable, clean force of a falling guillotine. It cleaved smoothly through the thick cords of muscle, shattered through the heavy cervical vertebrae, and exited the other side without a single stutter in its momentum. Time seemed to suspend itself in the frost yard. Thorne's massive, headless, fur-covered body remained kneeling for one surreal heartbeat. Then, with a sickeningly heavy thud that echoed off the towering black walls, the carcass collapsed backward into the snow. The severed head rolled across the icy ground, coming to a dead stop mere inches from the boots of the Bloodwood elders. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the howling northern wind seemed to hold its breath. Hundreds of apex predators, the most lethal warriors of the north, stared in paralyzed shock at the small human woman standing perfectly balanced in the center of the ring. Her heavy greatsword dripped slowly with the dark blood of a conquered king. Elara did not cheer. She did not roar. She calmly retrieved a clean linen cloth from her leather belt and clinically wiped the steaming blood from her black steel blade. She turned her icy, emotionless gaze toward the surviving Bloodwood wolves. "The trial is concluded," Elara said. Her voice carried across the freezing yard, sharp and unbroken. The freezing wind howled through the high peaks of the Obsidian Crag, but inside the frost yard, the silence was suffocating. Alpha Thorne, the monstrous tyrant of the Bloodwood pack, lay dead in the snow. He had not been defeated by dark magic or a rival Lycan king. He had been dismantled by science, precision, and the cold, unyielding iron of a human executioner. Elara stood breathing evenly, her heavy black steel greatsword resting easily at her side. She turned her icy blue eyes toward the surviving Bloodwood warriors. They were frozen, their faces pale with shock and horror. "The right of the Luna is absolute," Elara's voice rang out, cutting through the winter air like glass. She pointed a steady, leather-clad finger at Thorne's second in command. "Your Alpha wagered his life and his lands. He lost. By the blood laws your ancestors wrote, the Bloodwood pack no longer exists. You belong to me. Kneel." For one agonizing second, the Lycans simply stared. They were apex predators, proud and untamed. But as they looked at the small, fragile-looking woman holding a massive executioner's blade, the primal instinct of survival kicked in. Slowly, the Bloodwood beta dropped to his knees in the blood-stained snow. He bowed his head, exposing his neck in the ultimate gesture of submission. Like dominoes falling in the wind, the rest of the Bloodwood warriors sank to their knees. A murmur rippled through the ranks of the Obsidian Crag. Their golden eyes shifted from the dead rival Alpha to their fragile human bride. The mockery and disdain from the previous night evaporated entirely, replaced by a profound, reverent awe. One by one, the massive, battle-scarred warriors of Kaelin's pack dropped to their knees as well. The elders bowed low. Within moments, hundreds of wolves knelt in the frost, their heads lowered to a human. Kaelin broke the silence. He unlatched the heavy iron gate and walked slowly into the center of the yard. He ignored the kneeling wolves. His amber eyes were fixed entirely on Elara. He reached down and picked up the heavy velvet cloak she had discarded on the ice. He stepped close to her, his massive frame shielding her from the biting wind. Gently, With the same profound care he had shown her since her arrival, he draped the warm, fur-lined velvet over her shoulders. Lord Harrington did not send a peace offering, Kaelin said softly, the realization settling heavily in his deep voice. He looked at the calluses on her hands, the dark steel ring, and the massive blade. He sent an assassin. He sent a pawn to slit your throat in your sleep, Elara answered, her voice losing its icy edge, softening only for him. He traded me to die, so Thorne could burn your keep to the ground. Kaelin looked down at her. Betrayal and shock warred on his scarred face, but it was quickly swallowed by a fierce, swelling pride. Then why am I still breathing? Kaelin asked gently. Elara looked up into his amber eyes. For the first time in 15 years, a genuine, unguarded smile touched her lips. Because a weapon only serves the hand that wields it with purpose, she whispered. My father treated me as a disposable tool. Thorne treated me as weak prey. But you, the terrifying monster of the North, you treated me with nothing but absolute dignity. You were willing to throw away your crown to protect a girl you rely knew. She reached out, her thumb brushing against the rough scar on his jaw. A king who protects his people at the cost of his own pride is a true king, Elara said. And a true king deserves a queen who will slaughter his enemies. Kaelin's breath hitched. His wolf, the primal beast that ruled his soul, purred with absolute devotion. Slowly, gracefully, the massive alpha king of the Obsidian Crag lowered his towering frame. He dropped to one knee in the snow before her. He took her small, calloused hand, the hand wearing the blackened steel ring, and pressed his lips respectfully to her knuckles. My beautiful Luna, Kaelin vowed, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 oaths. My queen. The united packs raised their heads and let out a deafening, unified roar that shook the very foundations of the Black Keep. It was a roar of absolute loyalty. Lord Harrington's cowardly trap had failed. He had intended to destroy the North. Instead, he had given the Obsidian Crag its most dangerous weapon. The legend of the human Luna spread like wildfire across the territories, a chilling reminder to every arrogant lord and rival alpha. Never mistake silence for weakness, and never, ever mock the Alpha King's Luna. Because behind the monster's gentle protection stands an executioner, waiting patiently in the dark. A crown can be forced upon a head, but true loyalty is only won by the dignity one could take away. Would you have stood your ground against the monsters of the North to protect the one who showed you kindness? If this story touched your heart, subscribe and stay with us for more emotional tales of rejected Lunas, protective Alpha Kings, and queens rising from the pain.